things that's sent across will be available. And it looks like we are good now.
It's
Okay.
setting up. Give it just one more second. Now we're good.
Okay. So welcome to our January presentation for the SLC.news user group. We have Microsoft MVPs Kevin Bost and Mark Michaelis joining us today. So I'm going to do a quick introduction, an informal one for Kevin, since I know him at least a little bit. Have a pleasure to work with him on the last couple jobs. Kevin loves XAML. You might see that on his Twitch stream. He has a material design for XAML. I think that's how he says it, at least. I guess screencast or stream that goes live regularly. You'll see it at all hours of the day, be it morning, midday, and late at night, well past when most of us try to go to sleep. Let's see. So he works for Intellitect with Mark, and he's a software architect. He's very good at the DevOps type stuff, as well as provides lots of great feedback, be it on code reviews, architecture design, and just about name it. So Kevin is great. Feel free to take a look at his bio or his Twitch stream. And thank you very much, Kevin, for presenting. So we also have Mark. I haven't worked with Mark before, so I'm going to go a little bit on the books for this one. Save me from getting in trouble, I hope. So we have Mark Michaelis. So he's the founder and CEO of Intellitect. So Intellitect is based out of Spokane, Washington, where Kevin and Mark and I are from. He is a world-class C# expert, which is very recognized, both from the Microsoft MVP standpoint, as well as the author of the Essential C# book. So if you haven't seen it, that Essential C# book is now available online at essentialcsharp.com. So take a look at that. It's a wonderful resource. We have edits in there from Kevin as well as Eric Lippert as well. So lots of good content there. So Mark has been a Microsoft Regional MVP for, I think it was 25 years. Yes, for 25 years. He's an adjunct professor at Eastern Washington University, which happens to be where I got my bachelor's and master's degrees. And he's a regular speaker at conferences around the world and has written many articles as well as the book that we've already talked about. So with that, I'll read this last line. So Mark's a firm believer in autonomy, mastery, and purpose. His unmatched management and leadership style enables him to successfully handle the day with only 24 hours a day in it. And hopefully those leap years and leap seconds and all of that doesn't mess that up. So welcome, Mark. It's great to have you here as well with us.
Thank you, Caleb.
Yep, you are welcome.
Appreciate you reading rather than telling the truth. That's good.
Well, if I read it, I don't have to say, I don't have to claim
You don't
anything,
have to tell
right?
the truth. That's great. I appreciate that.
Okay. Excellent.
You don't have to say what Kevin says about me. So I'm much relieved that you did the intro, not Kevin.
Oh, I'm sure his could have added some fun stories.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay.
I would have made
with that, we'll go ahead.
negative
Let's turn the time over to Kevin and Mark for a great presentation on what's new. And then after that, we'll jump back over to content as we conclude and get ready for prizes. So Kevin and Mark, take it away for us, and I'll go ahead and stop the screen share.
Perfect. I will steal that from you real quick, and we will bring that up. Thank you, Caleb, for that introduction. I really appreciate it. As Caleb said, we've worked together in the past, so it's great to be able to see some friendly faces again. We actually really love questions and interruptions, so please feel free to stop us. If there's something that comes up, we kind of go very linearly through all of the material.
I do.
When we don't get sidetracked, we go very linearly through all the material. But yes, feel free, questions in the chat. I'm going to try to keep track of it and manage a whole bunch of stuff at the same time, or just unmute and ask questions. We love to discuss topics as we go through. So with that, I think Caleb kind of introduced everything that's there. If anybody is interested, the source code from this is out on GitHub. I will put a link in the chat for anybody who is interested. It's a lot of smaller examples, but if you'd like to get your own copy, take a look at it. that is where we are going to be working from. So, Caleb already introduced that. Did I miss anything?
No, I think we're good.
Great.
Let's get started.
Cool.
Sounds good.
Sweet. So we will dive in. So C# 11 and .NET 7 came with a whole bunch of new and exciting features. So we're going to start off focusing about the actual language specific features that are in C#, but oftentimes that line between what's a language and what's a framework feature kind of starts to get blurry as they tend to complement each other in a lot of cases. But we'll dive in on strings first. So
Okay.
take it off.
So to start out, one of the things that's fairly challenging is for us to go put a JSON string into C#. There's a couple things that are challenging about it, but most of all, the fact that they've got curly braces and quotes inside JSON strings, and that makes it really difficult. So we've gone ahead and put in here a sort of equivalent of a here string in other languages, or a string literal here with $, and an @sign. And we're going to go ahead and convert this to be a raw string literal, which is a new feature in C#, C# 11. Can we go do actual one below that?
Actual down below.
Yeah, we're going to change them to actual. So
Cool. What am I doing?
so let's go ahead and delete the @sign.
Okay.
And then let's go ahead and replace the @sign with 2 quotes at the beginning of the string and 3 quotes at the end of the string. And by doing that, it doesn't compile yet, but that characteristic of having 3 quotes at the beginning and 3 quotes, actually, let me correct that, 3 quotes or more at the beginning of the string, or 3 quotes or more at the end of the string, they must match, is what turns it into be a raw string literal. And the literal. And the question that you might ask immediately is, why would you have 3 or more? And the answer is because we want the ability to choose how many quotes we have to use inside the string when we want to decide to display a quote versus not displaying a quote. I'll show you that shortly, but the first thing we're going to do is let's go ahead and put that first line on the following line. And by doing this, we're essentially saying the raw string literal begins with a 3 triple quotes, and then it must be end. There can be no more syntax after that. And the end line, the end of the raw string literal, is 3 quotes at the very end and begins the beginning of the line. However, sorry, that last quote is not correct. However, it doesn't need to be in the beginning of the line. It needs to have no syntax before it, but it doesn't need to be in the beginning of the line. You can, in fact, indent it. Go ahead and just indent that line. And if we indent that line, you'll notice that we now have, that quote of where that's at, it actually identifies where you're allowed to put the rest of the text. One of the problems with the string literal, the string literal that we have on lines 14 through 17, is the fact that indentation is kind of weird. You have to actually make sure that the indentation is actually indented out, because every character in lines 14 through 17 matter. In contrast with the raw string literal, it actually only matters the stuff that appears before the last line of the string's first double quote. So line 24, all that stuff doesn't count, and it's all measured before what comes before line 24. The second thing you're noticing is that we previously had to use 2 curly braces. We can now put 1 curly brace and have it actually be considered a curly brace. But now that is interpreted as a curly brace that we can go put source code into. And so we want to say, hey, let's go ahead and convert that to be 2 curly braces. Well,
Bad Copilot. Copilot really, really wants to help.
And so we can specify how many curly braces are needed before we actually consider this to be string substitution.
Interpolation.
Interpolation.
Big long item.
So because we go put $2 signs, automatically that says, okay, if you only have 1 curly brace, then that is just interpreted as a curly brace. Imagine that. So now we actually have reproduced exactly what was appearing, and we should see in short order, a string should be passed.
Not quite, because this one here has the literal text curly brace name, and the one above, this is actually doing the replacement.
It's because we haven't changed the name.
So Inigo Montoya does not
Yes.
equal curly brace
If
name.
we change line 12 to just be named, it would be the same. Yes?
I mean, I'm not good at typing, but I can do stuff.
And now we've got a quote problem.
We do have a quote problem. You said something earlier about the number of quotes mattering.
Yeah, so because we have 2 quotes in there, because we have 3 quotes to start the string, that means that it's going to require two quotes to go ahead and quote it. So in this case, if we remove those double quotes, we now have an exact, and our test should be passing, and our test is passing.
You say passing. You have a very different definition of
Yes.
passing than I do.
What is the difference? How can you hover? Oh, we can't hover over.
Oh, we can't hover over, but we
Aren't the
can,
curly braces going to disappear from the expected?
yeah, so
Yes, thank you.
correct. So this guy and this guy drops. See,
Thank you.
hey,
Phew,
green check mark.
Finally, it's a good thing we got an audience.
Smart audience.
Okay, so we've now reproduced it, but of course we actually want to do string interpolation. So let's go ahead and change the name back to be Inigo Montoya. Can you spell Inigo Montoya?
I can. M-A-R-K.
Oh no.
It's very
Since we got string interpolation on both lines, it's gonna work anyway. So I guess that's
agreed.
fine.
It's very simple. So now, because getting this in is great, but I actually wanted to no Copilot, bad Copilot. Stop helping me,
I
Copilot.
thought we had turned Copilot off.
No, somebody left Copilot on. It wasn't a very smart decision.
Okay, so now because we actually want to do string interpolation, we're going to go ahead and have to put two curly braces, because we have $2 signs. If we have $3 signs, we have to put 3 curly braces.
For those cases where I really want double curly braces to be a literal, you can just keep increasing to my heart's content.
So I actually think if we look at this for the purposes of JSON strings alone, the feature is a great feature, because we type string literals related to JSON right in our source code all the time.
Too often.
Oh, there's one other thing that's worthwhile showing here. So string literals, we talked about the number of dollar signs maps to the number of curly braces. We've talked about the number of quotes -1 maps to an actual be a quote. And one other thing to note is you can now put a carriage return line feed in any string literal. It doesn't have to be string interpolation. It doesn't have to be one that's a raw string literal, but you can go ahead and put carriage return line feeds in there, and the text will go ahead and remain the same.
And this has been a kind of a reoccurring thing with a lot of the C# releases over the last few years. There is a ton of these kind of little syntactic sugar features that get thrown in. I just assume there's wild applause every time we show, hey, look, now we can add a new line. So I'm just going to assume that there's wild applause on YouTube right now.
I have to say, I am limited in writing. When I wrote my book, I was limited to 72 characters per line. So trying to get 72 characters in a line when you still have, file scope names, not file scope, fully scoped namespaces is a pain in the patootie. This is a great feature because I can put stuff on the next line. So I'm clapping.
Yeah. I mean, more importantly, before things like ternary operators would get annoyingly long inside of these, and now you can flatten them out or make a local.
Yeah.
So more formatting options.
Another thing to point out with enhancements was the fact that we now have the ability to support UTF-8. Is this a good time to clap?
Well, sure. I like UTF-8.
So now we can go and actually change our const string in line 12.
Const string on line 12. Oh, okay.
Let's go ahead and make that UTF-8. So we're going to say const string UTA per. Wait, what? This is really confusing. So there's a couple things to note. First of all, it is not possible to define it as a const.
Well, that seems annoying. This is a constant string.
Yeah, no, it's actually determined at runtime based on whichever runtime it's actually using. So you can no longer do it as const. And second of all, it's no longer a string. So the way to do this, because we all will remember this, otherwise we go ahead and call it a var, and then we just resolve the var.
So autocode and then.
Because that's of course how we will all go declare a UTF-8 string.
Well, and then the other thing to note too is it's not the same type of string. Like normally before we were able to just drop this guy straight in with interpolation. And now we've got a read-only span of bytes. So largely the UTF strings are going to be valuable to anybody who's having to do some sort of interop where that's a necessity, because before you'd end up going through like the system encoding namespace in order to be able to get those UTF-8 bytes back out. Now there's a nice easy way to specify a literal and have the framework help you, but
so now can we go to a name with Inigo Montoya and not make a UTF-8? Would that be okay?
You're going to make fun of my
No, another line.
Another line.
Because I don't want you. We want to keep the example with Mark.
Okay, perfect.
Yes.
I'm sorry. What are you asking for?
Const string.
Const string. Other name.
Yes.
See, you're gonna make fun of my typing next.
And you go INIGO,
And
MONTOI.
oh, see,
There
this
you
is
go.
why
Oh my
you install
goodness.
Copilot.
Oh, wow, that's pretty good.
You have now poisoned its cache well enough that it has figured out that we have to make Princess Bride jokes. Okay, excellent. I was worried. Here, we'll fix this back in and let that sit as other name. We only need one new line.
Okay, great. Questions? Any questions? We're getting a warning there because,
Because we didn't use it.
oh yeah, that's what I thought. Okay, I think we're done with strings.
I think we are done too.
Oh, this is great. Okay, I just recently wrote the material for pattern matching, and I think there's at least 8 different kinds of pattern matching in the C# 11.
Is that all?
I
I think there's more.
Well, I could be wrong. I could be wrong. Okay, so what we can do now is we can actually go write a pattern that looks for what are the elements in a collection. And a collection in this case is anything that supports an IList interface. So anything that you can go and index into to go and retrieve the variables. So let's go ahead and do as an is operator. We could go ahead and do switches. You could also go ahead and do but instead of that, we're just going to go ahead and use an is operator. So item is, and here if you just cut and oh my goodness, this is
Bad
just
Copilot.
have it. That would have actually been correct.
Really?
Yeah, that was actually correct.
Darn you, Copilot.
Delete the 4
I was gonna say, I don't think it's
and make
quite-
it square brackets. It's not quite. It's close.
By the end of this, we're gonna teach Copilot how to do pattern matching. This is gonna be great.
Okay, so we're running Visual Studio Enterprise, so it's automatically running our test for us. And we've gone ahead and typed the test, and you can say this is an identical match to what is the content of strings. That's great. But we can also go ahead and use span. So let's go ahead and do the same thing. Just cut and paste line 10 into 11. And let's go ahead and delete the first 3 items and just use ...
So rather than matching on everything, we can
just go ahead and do a span. And now it's saying, hey, no matter how many elements and no matter what the content of those elements, as long as the last element is father, then we're going to go ahead and match.
perfect. Okay. So you are my father also works.
Yes. And similarly, we can go ahead and remove the content from the middle. So we can copy line 10 again, paste it into line 12. And we can delete the middle of it and support, say, hey, as long as it begins with you and ends in father, then we're fine. And it doesn't matter how many elements. We're not counting elements here. That's totally fine. If you wanted to count elements, you can go ahead and use a discard. So let's copy the line again.
Keep going.
And let's go ahead and put an actually that's, yeah. Okay.
Well, so I think, so this one here is interesting because then this very intentionally.
That's not going to match.
Well, I know it's not going to
Yeah.
match, but we've had our test pass this whole time.
Yes,
And tests
okay,
should
fair.
start red and then go green.
Okay.
See,
Oh, that's a
Failure
good.
first.
That's a good.
Failure
But if we
first.
do it the other way, people won't know.
that's the,
Yes. Okay. So in order to say we want to actually specify the elements, we can go put an underscore. We're going to put 2 underscores since there's 4 elements to this array, and we can go ahead and get a passing test to go specify that. What is really frustrating, I don't work for Microsoft, so I can say this, is there's no way to say, I want to select a collection that only has killed my father in the middle.
how about you? Well, yeah. So you want to know if
I want to do a
there's-
span, ... right in the beginning there.
Let's just grab the first one again, because why not? All right, so we want to just know, hey, does items actually contain
Any number of items beforehand and any number of items after, and irrespective of what they are, that doesn't work. And that is really frustrating.
that
so
is
There
frustrating.
is a set. Now you can try to do gymnastics like what if we use an AND operator, logical as part of logical pattern matching, but that's not going to work. So essentially this ability to do this, you're going to have to go back to using a for each loop or something like that. Maybe a span, redeclaring array, something like that.
Some sort of state machine in
Yeah,
order to
Exactly.
check it.
Exactly.
We'll comment that since it doesn't compile.
Or just change it to false. Oh, it compile, you're right. Sorry.
Yeah, compiling
Yes,
is
yeah,
an
yeah,
important
details.
feature of running the test.
Details. I was thinking you just use a pound if, but okay, this
Okay,
is fine.
sure.
We'll let you.
2 slashes, a lot less characters. I'm lazy.
Another one that's interesting is if you want to go ahead and say, I want it to be an array, but it must have no elements. Can you go ahead and do that?
Array, but no elements.
No elements.
So, well, an empty array has a 0.
There you
Do
go.
I just leave this off?
There you go.
Bad Copilot, stop helping.
So in this case, it doesn't match. So we're going to go ahead and change it to false.
That would make more sense, since it's not an empty array.
Yeah.
So this is actually a nice very simple syntax to comparing against like items.length, right? And checking against 0.
Yeah, yeah.
Because what I really needed was a way to condense that check into only 2 characters.
Now, if you wanted to go and say, well, I really do want to check if the second element is killed and the third element is my, or the second from the last element is my, then we could go ahead and just use a slice. And so instead of using this, we could say assert false. Instead of items, then we can go ahead and say items 1, meaning the first element. So put a square brace there.
Oh, I got you. So we're going back to older syntax.
Yes,
old syntax. Like
well, it's not that old.
I mean, it's all the way back to like C# 10. 7.
Yes.
Like I said.
And now we're gonna have to go ahead and delete you.
Right. And drop that off.
Right.
So rather than trying to slice on the pattern, we slice the other side.
But it doesn't
kind of get there-ish.
But we have to know by the virtue in line 16, we have to know it's the second element and the second from the last element. So it's not quite as good as line 14 that we want to make.
But something like this, if I was going to implement my own version of this, being able to do like a range over it and pull the spans out might be a convenient way of doing it.
The other option is it's open source. So if you want to go change the compiler, you're welcome to go do that.
Right.
Just making sure. Okay. So the other thing that's interesting is that, of course, strings themselves are arrays. So rather than saying, hey, we want to get all the text, let's go ahead and select all the items that begin with K.
Okay, so we got a question in chat.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Says, you're showing example with arrays. Will this work for all lists, IEnumerable, iCollection, etc.? What set of data types can we use on this?
That's a great question. It will work for all items that support iList.
So the BCL ones that'll be obvious to go with that are going to be your list, arrays, observable collection. I'm trying to think of what else is it.
Read only.
Yeah, read only list implements.
Yeah.
So a lot
the point being is it does have to index into it. You basically have to have an index, the capability to do an indexer. It does not work for IEnumerable.
Yeah. And I don't quote me on this, but I believe it does follow duck typing. So I don't know if it necessarily even has to have the interface. As long as it supports the capabilities, you'll be able to work. So, which is part of how they oftentimes will get backwards compatibility with that looser duck typing, is as long as it has this behavior, the compiler can figure out what to do.
Yeah. So back to what we're saying. So here we can go and say let's put a square bracket, but instead of we want to match on a letter. So let's put square brackets within it. So we're basically using a pattern inside the first element to identify which one we want to go ahead and get. And then after that, we're saying anything can come after that. So there's a comma after the Y.
Yeah, Copilot's really wanting to help.
And then let's do a dot after the comma there.
So hang on, we're gonna add some white space because this is gonna get hard to see. I'm just gonna have a string of random characters here in a minute.
Yes.
Go.
So let's just stop right there. That should be good. So let's just
have to pass.
So here we have the element, the first element. It must begin with the Y because that itself is an array, and then all the other elements inside that first. Inside the array of the string, we don't care about. They're irrelevant. We could, of course, go put a W in there. We could do that. Then we're saying for all the other elements in items, those can be anything we like. It could be any number and any elements. We could also go ahead and specify, okay, the last one has to begin with an F, in which case we would put a comma and.
Right. So, well, we already did the starting character. I'm gonna go off script. We're gonna do an R. Look at that. Oh, and. Pattern match to.
You need a comma.
Oh yeah. So there.
When I point, does everyone see that?
Well, yeah.
They can see me pointing. They just don't know what I'm pointing at.
So something like that, where then it ends up matching on the first item starting with a Y, the last item ending in an R, and any number of items, including 0. The dot can match on 0 elements.
Yeah. So another really interesting thing is sometimes you don't just want to decide whether you're matching or not. You actually want to pull it out. So for example, we could go ahead and say, if items is, and go ahead and say comma, dot, and let's say string and last word. Perfect. That's really good. And now we can actually go and say, it will actually go say, allow us to get the last element in the array of items and go ahead and verify that that is equal to father, for example. Is it father or father?
Most people say father,
Okay, good.
but
Thank you.
I've never been accused of being very good.
Caleb said I was from Spokane, so I think people can tell.
Your
Okay.
Midwestern accent.
That's right. Yeah, so the other thing to point out is we can go ahead and use list pattern matching, but then embed the items within here that have other kinds of pattern matching. In this case, we're going to go ahead and use a declaration of a variable that's part of the pattern matching inside the list. So we can combine these together, and that's then using recursive based pattern matching to go ahead and get the elements inside of it.
Yeah, so for people who are familiar with the property pattern match that was added a while back in C#, this kind of follows a very similar thing where inside of your curly brace or at the end, you can then allocate local variables that are then scoped within this to be able to use them typically within an if or similar where you care to pull them back out and do something.
And we could actually use that. So inside where we got the dot dot in line 19, we could actually use, property pattern matching. So we could put an element in there that says like length equals, and we can go further into it. So, okay.
Cool.
Questions about strings?
List pattern matching.
Thank you. Strings.
When you
I want to keep things basic. Questions about list pattern matching?
And I will point out, anyone who pulls the repo below, we do have some additional tests down here that show off. There was some additional additions around additional additions.
Yes.
There was some more stuff.
Did that make them additional?
Around pattern matching with spans, largely for memory allocation, so that you don't end up having to allocate more than is necessary or avoid memory allocations.
Yeah.
So, but in terms of what you actually type, it matches what's up here. It's just it works on more types.
I want to just point out with line 18 where we're matching on the Y there. It's really interesting that we can use list pattern matching on strings themselves. Like this would be really poor man's version of like regular expressions, but it's an interesting capability that we can go ahead and actually just match on specific letters inside a string and to go ahead and pull stuff out.
It's very poor man's regex. very, very poor man's.
I think we could find a lot of people that could do that more easily than they could do regex. So, whatever.
Yeah. So
this is cool.
Yeah. So this one here is going to be taking advantage of some XUnit behavior. So for people who aren't familiar with XUnit, a theory attribute is how you do a data-driven test. You don't need a lot of information aside from this is how you pass parameters into your unit test methods. And then the inline data, in this case, we're just using the name of to be able to pass in a string. So compile time, name of just replaces whatever is inside of here with a literal string. But the nice part is the compiler knows about the identifier. So any sort of refactoring tools then get picked up.
So just to clarify, previously you could not use name of in an attribute.
Correct. This is new. The fact that this now works up here. So
the fact that we can use name of in the attribute and we can refer to anything, even stuff that's below, that's really powerful because now we don't have to go ahead and use those magic string just to type in the string in quotes. So just the fact that we can support name of to go pull this out is a feature alone. It's a compile time feature with C#.
Right. And then the other one that I will show here is the same type of thing, theory, inline data of type string. This hopefully doesn't surprise anybody. We pass in a type, we get it out. There's no C# 11 stuff in here. But what starts to get more interesting is when we get down to this inline data here. So this is the big change in C# 11 is before attributes were not allowed to be generic. And the only way you could actually end up kind of doing that poor man's generic was by passing in a type of. And now we can actually specify a generic argument to our attributes. So this inline data is not from XUnit, just to be clear. This is something we defined just as a demonstration of taking some code that previously didn't support generic attributes and adding that in.
There's an important caveat that we should probably show.
We should probably show that.
So if we do an F12 on inline data and jump to the definition, which we've gone ahead and written below there, you will notice that it's not following a C# 1.0 naming convention. You should always, without exception, have a suffix of attribute on your attributes.
Well, that's fine.
And
I'll just add it.
we can do that, but you'll notice if we do, it doesn't recognize it in inline data. What happened there? Why did that not change?
That's a really good question. Compile that.
Are you gonna call me a liar? No.
No.
Why is it's not showing up in the ID?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. I
So.
would have done a rename when we did that rename.
Yeah, that would have been a smarter approach, but. This may end up being a difference in compiler version because that
That is kind of
works
scary.
just
Okay,
fine.
we'll just take it back.
We'll just carry on. Ignore everything Mark said about a naming violation. The other thing to call out here is the access modifier that is down on this class, that this is something new that was added in C# 11, is we now have the ability to do file scope types. So this is a type that, unlike being either private or internal, where we might otherwise use them, this is now limited to only being accessed inside of this file. So most of the time when we're declaring types inside of C#, what file they're in is pretty arbitrary, right? We can make things partial. We can split our definitions up across multiple files. The actual file itself doesn't matter, except now it does. And this little guy here means that if we try to reference this outside of this file, we'll end up getting a compile error because this thing is scoped into here. Now, most of the time, this is probably not overly useful in a lot of normal code, perhaps where you might otherwise have used a private class. If there's a reason why you, rather than making like a private inner class, you want to file scope it, sure. The primary use case for these ones is around source generators, because source generators wanted to generate additional types that were internal to them and not clutter up whatever type they were being adding additional code into. And so this was added as a way of giving source generators that easy way of creating
I think
types.
the reason they did it was because then they could generate really unique names.
That is true.
Yes. So if you look if you go up to line 42, you'll notice that it's not equal to inline data backtick 1. In actual fact, we get a really nasty string that appears there.
Here, oh, it's really trying to help me. Replace name, inline data.
Wow, that was good.
Oh, it is really trying to help me now.
Just delete attribute.
You know what?
Just type
Nope,
it in.
no, I'm just gonna add it here.
There you go. Good. Let's go. Can we see the output from that test?
We can see the output of the test if I actually open it. But that's gonna require like clicking and stuff. Let's see.
Type of test file scope name.
This guy, and I'm going to grab this guy.
So you'll notice there we've got an output helper. We're throwing the data out to the screen, the name out to the screen, and it actually goes ahead and does a mangled name at the bottom for what is actually inline data attribute. That's the actual name of that type.
Yeah, so when you use a file scope type, the way they avoid type collisions is by generating a very long additional identifier.
GUID wasn't good enough.
Yeah, GUID's not good enough. We have to go bigger than a GUID because only globally unique. We have to prep for being outside of global.
When we're invaded by.
Yes, we don't know how long GUIDs will remain.
Space travel is becoming pretty common, so global is no longer good enough.
Exactly.
Yeah, so there's I think it was one of the .NET community videos where they actually talked about the architecture behind that and said that's a hash. And I think they didn't use a GUID because they wanted it to be deterministic when you have that deterministic flag set on your compilations.
Which does make a lot of sense because a randomly generated one then would end up changing each time.
Yeah, and the hash code is going to remain relatively static.
Well, hash of the contents.
Yeah. Okay. Any questions on attributes? So the two features that we're specifically calling out is the fact that you can use name of in a parameter for an attribute, and that you can go ahead and use generics. And the third thing is you can go ahead and have a file scoped class definition. Cool. Oh boy, I don't know if we want to show this one.
Yeah.
I want to start out by saying that I was really excited about the fact that Microsoft had given us the ability to do required. This like, finally, we've got the ability to do required stuff. It's going to do exactly what I want. Most importantly, what I wanted was that I didn't have to do all this checking of my data that was being set and things like that. So this is a little bit disappointing, but we can go ahead and show it. So can we show the class to start out?
Sure.
So we've got a person class. Before I forget, you'll notice that the date of birth on the person class is the data type is date only. So a new data type added to .NET 7, excuse me, is date only and also time only. So if you want to have a type like a date of birth, we don't actually care about the time, generally speaking. It would be great to just have a date only. So we've got a type on there for date only. And then we've got a nullable first name and a nullable last name.
Yep.
And we've got a constructor where we're only setting the first name. Okay, only setting the first name. And what we want to do is go ahead and let's assign first name.
First name?
Yeah.
Sorry, you're losing me. Where are you wanting to go? Assign first name where? I think you were wanting to make one of these
One of those required, sorry.
Thank you. So let's go there and make last name required, but you should spell required like that. It works better if you spell it that way.
By making it required, we've now basically enforced a compiler check that the value for last name is going to go ahead and set. So if we go ahead and delete last name from our initializer, you'll notice that we now get an error. Hey, you have to set the last name. And so seemingly this is great. We've got it. We no longer have to go ahead and specify a constructor. We can just go ahead and mark something that was required, and then last name doesn't need to be set. What's interesting, if we go do the same thing for first name, let's mark that as required. It now tells us we have to also go ahead and put the value for first name, even though we've got a constructor that is setting the first name.
It's kind of obnoxious. I just went through and did all that work.
So the unfortunate thing here is what we've got to go ahead and specify both first name in two places, both in the constructor and inside the initializer.
Well, and then more importantly, I've decided to go through and specify two different values.
What do you mean?
I specified an ego on the constructor and
Yes.
then you for the property initializer.
You can go ahead. So you can also go ahead and change it. So be passing two different values. Now, that was possible before anyway, but we're actually forcing you to go ahead and set it twice. That's the key difference here. I mean, we could do it in an initializer and in a constructor before, but the fact that we're forcing it is definitely unfortunate. Next, so it is possible to go ahead and say, hey, if we got a constructor for it, let's just turn off the validation on the because it's a constructor, we don't have to have validation on the initializer. So let's go ahead and specify that set required members is actually done inside the constructor. So here we've gone and said, hey, if the person instantiates this type with the constructor, then don't worry about using the initializers. What's unfortunate about that is it assumes that you know what you're doing, and it assumes that you actually did indeed set both last name and first name, and therefore it's disabled it entirely. And now last name is no longer required to be set because we use set required members. And in fact, last name is not set in this particular example.
Sorry.
No, you're good.
I keep using the wrong unit test framework.
This is good. Okay. I'm trying to think if there's anything else we want to say about that. I think we should go through the coding guidelines at this point. I think we've pointed out all the issues, but I want to talk about the coding line as we go through. So first of all, you should not use parameters in your constructors when you have, for any parameters that are required. Because of the fact that when you mark something as required, it has to be set both in the constructor and inside the initializer. You should not put required parameters in as constructor parameters, because that would force the identity have to be set twice and defeat the point of having a parameter inside your constructor. So we should not be setting something like first name inside the constructor to go ahead and do that. Secondly, is you should not use set required members unless all parameters assigned valid values during construction. But what's interesting about that is we're saying, hey, first name and last names need to be set. The only thing we can possibly set it to would be some value that we know at compile time. because we don't want to have those parameters inside the constructor.
So,
So
or if there was a reasonable computed value or similar.
yeah,
might be a
or
possibility.
null was valid, which would be strange because it's set by that. Zero, let's say it was zero for an integer or something like that, then no, actually that wouldn't work. For a nullable integer, setting it to 0 would be valid. Or 42, you have to set it to
42. 42 is always a valid value for an integer.
Consider having default constructor on types with required parameters relying on object initialize. So essentially what I would suggest here is just don't have a constructor aside from the default constructor on types, or more importantly, we're saying here is you should just have a default constructor. That way people can use the default constructor, and then they can rely on the initializers for setting the remaining parameters. So let me say that again. If you're going to have required parameters, consider having a default constructor that has no parameter, which by definition has no parameters. So using person there would go ahead and deal with that. Required members where the default value of type is valid. Avoid. So if the default value is valid, so if, let's say, for example, in date of birth, the default value is valid. In this case, it's null. If that's valid, don't go ahead and mark it required. That would be defeating the purpose. So don't use required members where the default value is valid, because you're forcing people to set stuff. There's some like really rare cases, which is why we use it as avoid rather than never, or do not. But required members where the default value type is valid, just avoid those altogether. And lastly, remember that when you add anything that's required to a class that's already been released, you're changing the interface, because you're now forcing people to go ahead and set those values inside the initializer, in which case their code won't compile. So be very careful. If you ever go ahead and add something that is required to a type that has already been released, you are changing the interface and forcing people's code to potentially not compile, in which case they need to go and update it. Be very wary, you're making a breaking change to code when you add something that's required. Kevin, you want to talk about FYIs?
Sure. So the way required actually ends up working under the hood is similar to how the C# team implemented the init keyword that we have for properties. Underneath it's what's called the mod rec is the code for it. The important part there is it doesn't necessarily affect APIs that are going to be interacting with your object via reflection. So you can still kind of bypass some of this stuff in different cases. If, for example, you're using this as a BTO or similar, which is probably a slightly more awkward use case to run into. So just be aware of that you can kind of dodge that. And I don't know, this sentence you ended off with a VI.
So what we're saying in there is that the scope of something as marked as required has to be greater than the scope of the class. So in this case, I couldn't go ahead and mark those required members as private.
Right. So you can't go private required because that would be a little dumb. The caller has to be able to set it.
Yeah.
So that one's somewhat obvious because the compiler will whack you upside the head.
It's just an FYI as you go ahead and type.
So what's the backward compatibility model on this? So say I compile an assembly using this feature, and now I try and drop it into something older.
So yeah, you run into some potential hiccups there. Like if you've got a similar to I would say it matches the same behavior as your init keyword, where you can still kind of run into that same problem of the type will be visible and seeable, but you'll still end up with issues where it'll say, I can't invoke this because the older compiler doesn't necessarily know how to specify that mod requirement. Because when you make the invocation, you have to be able to specify those, and the older compiler is just not going to know about it to be able to set it. So if you are compiling something and trying to target an older TFM target framework, then yeah, I would probably caution against its use. Again, there may be cases where you can get away with it, depending on like if this is expected to be interacted as something that's serialized or not expected to be constructed by somebody outside. There may be cases where that's acceptable, but it's probably on a case-by-case basis. And I would suspect that until you have everybody using latest compilers, you probably want to avoid it. Again, latest compiler is more important in this case than always sorry, I think I said target framework. The older compiler version is what matters more than framework, because the compiler is what's going to specify that mod rank.
Okay, thanks.
I think this is great for DTOs, where you don't have a constructor, but I'm hard pressed to start using this a lot in my APIs, and you pretty much can never use it if you're changing the API and you worry about backwards compatibility. So the scope of this is fairly limited, in my opinion.
Yeah, I would not be surprised to see improvements in this feature going forward. But yeah.
There were earlier versions of this that didn't make it to production, where set required members allowed you to specify which parameters you were explicitly setting. I'm not sure if it did validation or not, but that complexity was eliminated. And now you just have in a single attribute that set required members with no parameters.
Yeah, and just to say it again, the moment you set this attribute on here, you're effectively telling the compiler, trust me, I've actually done it. So once you set it, you're taking on that burden to make sure that you have actually done it.
Cool. Okay, next.
Everybody's favorite, structs.
Yeah, we code these all the time. It's great. Okay, so let's look at the struct that we've declared. And you will notice that we've got some initialization on longitude and latitude. We've got a constructor in line 35 that just takes the latitude, and we've got a coordinate that takes no parameters, just a default constructor. So let's start by going ahead and doing an assert equal in the first test up there. We've just instantiated. So here we're initiating coordinate, we're initiating default. Let's go into assert.r equal double, and let's go ahead and say 42 plus 77, some number, whatever you like.
42 plus 77 sounds great.
I'm not on the right one.
You tell me.
42, sorry. Just do 42.
Okay.
And coordinate.latitude.
We won't add numbers together. That's complicated.
Yeah, that was complicated. Close parentheses, save. And we're good. So as you would expect, no, as you wouldn't expect, sorry, I was gonna say.
No one expects a 42 there
So
yet.
wait, what the heck? If you scroll down to the bottom, you'll notice we are assigning latitude 42. And here in the constructor, we've gone ahead and verified that it is 42, and we did the default, and it's not getting set.
That seems really not normal. Because when I set a property on a class, this initializer gets invoked when I create the class.
And the reality is with structs, it does not. You cannot do that. So
Should it be an R equal instead of just an equal?
No, in this case, Mark keeps using MS test syntax, and we've got X unit. But yes, in MS test, it would be an R equal.
Did I say R equal?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's okay. I'm translating in my head to X unit for you.
My fingers would have typed it better. I don't know what to say. Sorry. The one thing to note, though, however, is name is being set inside the constructor of line 31.
So this constructor here.
Yeah. So if you go ahead and check name, is it actually equal to an empty string?
Oh, I guess I got to get rid of the other one above. Hang on. Fix that. Coordinate. No, Copilot. Name. Are you not listening? I'm convinced Copilot listens to my microphone.
I think the answer is, are you not learning?
You.
So even if you set the data inside the constructor, it's not going to go ahead and be set. So to correct this test, I think we shouldn't do R equal. I think we should do not equal.
We can lower the value of the test, sure.
We can do that for the prior line too, actually.
I mean, I can lower value of any test. It's also not equal to 1,000,000, but for what it's worth, we can test all the integers in the middle as well.
There we go. Could we use pattern matching to do that?
I certainly.
Okay. Most unfortunate. So the equivalent scenario that would do the exact same thing, we could basically just copy the code except those two tests, and then go ahead and dereference the array, the element in the array, put a 0 there. You have the same problem when you go ahead and use arrays. because they don't get initialized.
Yeah, and this matches, for anybody who's worked with structs before, this has been a common paradigm in C# since I think well before I started using C#,
That's
of structs are not classes. Therefore, you cannot expect the constructor to behave this, or the lack of a constructor being invoked to behave the same way.
I think what's unfortunate here is we are defining a default constructor, and the default constructor is not getting called when we don't specifically call the default constructor with new. So initialization doesn't happen with default, initialization doesn't happen with arrays, initialization doesn't happen with properties on classes or structs for that matter. You just don't get any of that initialization capability unless you specifically call coordinate or new on the constructor.
So then what's the new feature that we actually have then?
Let's go ahead and look at the constructor.
This one here, right? The
Yes.
double latitude.
So in
That's
this,
the one that's being invoked.
yes, in this case, we're going to go ahead and actually pass in a value for 30. And we should actually see that gets initialized to the value 30 inside the constructor.
So I got that already. So I got the assert equals 30 on the latitude. So if we do in fact invoke this constructor and set it up, and then we can also do and validate that the Copilot, you are really doing your best, but you are struggling. If I want to write bad code, darn it, let me do it. We can validate that the name is in fact there. And then what about down here?
Oh, and also hold on, language got set. Yeah, this is interesting.
Yeah, so we can go here. I mean, we just went through going and explaining that no, it's of course not going to be 30. But now we actually have 1.
Yeah. Okay, so here's the guideline. If you're going to have initialization, you must call the constructor. If you're going to expect initialization is actually executed, whether the initialization is on an assignment in the declaration time or inside a constructor, you must call the constructor. The difference now is we can have a default constructor where we can set data, but it is not going to be called unless you explicitly call the constructor.
All right, and so we can drop this guy in here and actually hit this default constructor now as well. We expect this guy to fail. Because now we should actually walk through this, and now these initializers, which previously weren't,
Let's do the test first.
which previously weren't being set here, are now being properly set.
Questions? You're doing okay on time?
Yeah.
Okay. Operators on interfaces. So let's describe the scenario first. In this case, you'll notice we've got a couple tests here. We've got a test for add that takes 2 doubles, and we then go ahead and verify that when you add the 2 together, it works. We've then got a test for decimals. We go ahead and take 2 decimals, we verify the add, and in both cases, we've gone ahead and provided add methods.
Well, and the problem that I see very quickly is now I want to do ints or any other of my fun numeric types that actually has a plus operator on it, or I expect to have pluses on it. But I can't do it. Or at least I can't do it generically. I can keep adding overloads to my heart's content, which is why system.math has about 1,000, give or
You
take.
couldn't do it generically prior to C#11.
Prior.
Right. So at the bottom, we've gone ahead and written an add method that is generic. But inside the implementation of line 31, you'll notice that we're actually using the plus operator. So the key feature here that we didn't have before is there was no way to use a plus operator on a generic type that came into your method. So again, I'm looking at Kevin typing above, but I'm looking at line 32. There was no way to provide a constraint for an operator. That was not possible. So you might have an I number and it might have a .add method, and then you could use .add inside the method. but there was no way to use the plus operator because there was no way to specify an operator there was no way to specify an interface that had an operator in it. If we now go into iNumber and into a iNumber base
Keep following
and
the
into
hierarchy.
addition,
Go all the way.
you will notice that now it is possible to go ahead and define operators as static abstract methods inside an interface. So interfaces have the ability to have a static abstract member for an operator, not just for a regular method, but actually for an operator, so that now we can put a constraint on the type parameter of whatever we're writing and allow the plus or minus or whatever to go ahead and use that. Now, I think it's going to be very rare that you define operators because they're almost all defined for you. It's certainly for things like math. But we could even use the same operator like add. If you wanted to use add for strings, we could go ahead and use the same thing and just support the addition operator or something like that to go get it to work.
Yeah, and just to clarify, the addition of static abstract members on interface, that's the C# feature that enabled this generic math. So this was one of those cases where the language feature then complemented the framework feature of going through and implementing these interface on all of the common BCL types that you would expect these on, ints, doubles, etc. So Microsoft took the heavy-handed approach of making these, and they made these interfaces very granular. They took the interface segregation principle all the way as far as they could swing it and got it down to where this was fairly tight on both sides.
Okay, so let's go back to our test.
Yep.
And so the advantage now, okay, it's already written it. So advantage down in line 24, we can pass integers in, and it'll go ahead and call the add method on line 31 and go ahead and support add, because as long as integer implements iNumber, this will go ahead and work.
Okay.
So
This-
if you then comment out lines 28 and 29,
Yes, good point. Absolutely.
everything still works?
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, that's exactly right.
Yes, so we can go ahead and kick these off. The only reason they were still being invoked a moment ago is because just like the standard rules for method overload resolution has been in C# for a long time, generics take a lower precedence than something that matches on explicit types. But now that these overloads don't exist, this is the only one, all the tests still pass.
Very cool. Okay, let's go to our expressions here. So let's go ahead and uncomment this code. So what we want to do is we want to take what we had as a coordinate before. It was a partial class, so we can go and add to it right here. And we'll notice instead of passing in X and Y, we actually want to go ahead and pass in a string. And to do that, we obviously have to go define a string method. And then since Kevin is such an aficionado of regular expressions, we want to go ahead and parse this with a regular expression.
Yeah, and as the old saying goes, once you solve a problem with regular expressions, now you have two problems.
I don't know. Once you try to solve a problem, once you've solved it, it's fine. It's prior to solving it that it's a problem.
Yeah, so let's go through. We're going to do just declare regex, and I'm going to leave this guy here, and I'm going to put partial on him as well.
So for those of you who don't remember the partial feature, this basically says, allow this code even if there's no implementation.
Yeah. And then what we'll go ahead and do is there's a new framework feature called generated regex.
You see that?
Yes, it's okay. Copilot, stop it. You're spoiling the end. But
fortunately, it didn't put the attributes. It didn't put the names
it did
in.
put the D in the word generated. So it's getting pretty good. This is getting really sad, Copilot. You are making
Actually, do it without that first. Let's do it without that. Let's
Okay.
parse it without.
just parse it without it.
Yeah.
Okay. So if we come in here, we can go ahead and do let's see.
Match equals regex dot match text, which is the parameter coming in.
Thank you.
If match success,
Oh, error checking and everything.
details. And then we can go ahead and curly braces, please. And let's say latitude equals
Yeah, that's that. Darn you, Copilot. If anybody hasn't figured it out, Copilot is absolutely amazing and is well worth it. I have a love-hate relationship with it at the
Can
moment.
we go, and our test is working. Test is passing, look at that.
Of course, we gave Copilot.
Okay, let's go ahead and put group names into that person.
Sure, real quick, before we do that, one of the things that I want to call out, so this generated regex attribute is kicking off a source generator that is implementing this method in a partial. And one of the things that it does when you implement it is it actually gives you some XDoc or some XML docs on the method showing you what it actually sees as the pattern. So you can actually get a well-documented method for, hey, this is what this regex is going to do. And it's reasonably good at reading the regex patterns.
And furthermore, you'll notice that the regex is color-coded. As Kevin goes and types here, you'll notice that it's actually parsing it inside the IDE and giving us color coding of the regex inside the expression, so we can actually see that it's happening. Let's go ahead and using a handler for doing that as well. Did we see that on the JSON string?
Not exactly. So some of this color coding stuff is going to be a Visual Studio based feature. So updates to latest. This is not preview. I always have to check which one I'm in. This is not preview. So
okay.
Latest Visual Studio.
I think we still wish I latest the preview versions. I think we're going to start seeing things like JSON files parsed and stuff like that in the same manner.
Correct. And now we've botched our little thing. I mean, it technically still works with 1 and 2 because we did that, but now we can break this guy apart and make him a little cleaner. But so for these generated regexes, there is a couple small limitations. So rather than needing to parse this regular expression pattern at runtime, this is now being done at compile time. And you can go and take a look at the generated file and you can see the state machine that it actually builds up. In the worst case scenario where it's unable to generate that for you, it can fall back to the regular regex class rather than the generated derived class that this method is being implemented with. And there is one limitation with, what is it? The backwards positive look behind. One of the regex options, the attribute will not work with. And I'm blanking on which one of the options it is. I think it was, positive look behind, one of them.
If you don't encounter it, it'll tell you.
Yes, it will happily tell you when you try to go there. But for most of the time, this will give you a nice small performance bump. It's not huge because the latest stuff in like Net 6 was already doing like caching of the regular expression pattern. So if it saw the same one multiple times, but it does save you that overhead of that first parse. And it gives you the nice tooling support of being able to actually have some nice documentation on what that regular expression pattern is actually doing. The other thing to note is because this is specified with an attribute, this pattern up here follows all the rules with attribute arguments. So it has to be known at compile time, a compile time constant. So if you do end up having to use like a regular expression that you're trying to build up at runtime, this is not the tool for you. You'd still end up doing it with a regular regex.
The warning there is probably because name isn't set.
Yeah, name must contain a non-null value. Fine. Copilot, you didn't implement that part for me. You can't have my job yet.
A Copilot doesn't know that you have to have a name on a coordinate. Okay, we got time for one more here quickly. So let's talk about the problem. So one of the problems that we have is that you want to have the same version of components that you're referencing. So NuGet packages that you reference, you want to have the same version across all the projects within your solution. And previously, the actual version you reference is actually mentioned in the project file. So we open the project file, we look at this, you'll notice that the version number is in the project file. So if I have 10 project files in my solution, I have a version number in each of them, and those version numbers could vary between them. So to deal with that, we're going to copy all of the package references out of this file. We're not going to delete them. We're just going to copy them out. We're going to go into centralized package management there, and we're going to rename that file to directory packages.prop.
Let's see. Directory packages.
So directory packages.prop is a new name. It didn't have that before. As part of the MS build, we now have a directory packages.prop. We want to go put that inside a project.
Sorry, we're going to just real quick reopen it so that we get syntax highlighting.
That's way nicer. I'm glad you pointed that out. Thank you.
Yeah, so
Project, it doesn't need to have a namespace. And we're going to put it inside an item group.
I have to spell item group correctly. Then we'll do that maneuver. Okay.
And we're going to remove the
Well, so we're gonna go through, we're gonna clean some of this.
oh, that's right. Yeah.
Clean some of this stuff up. We'll get rid of all of these, and then everywhere where we have package reference, so I'm just gonna self-close these so that I can block edit, because that'll be much nicer. And then rather than package reference, we're gonna go ahead and say package version instead. Okay, so now I have a centralized place where I've listed every NuGet package that I want to include in my solution, but every project in my solution may not want to have the same NuGet packages. So inside of our project, we still have to tell it which NuGet packages that we want, and we also have to tell it that we want to actually use centralized package management. So if we come in here, this guy here,
Remove the versions.
yeah, we can take these versions off here because now they will be managed centrally for us and we don't have to worry about that. And then took away my, what is it? Enable central package.
Central is not spelled correct.
Well,
I don't know why it's so picky, but
yeah, detail. And then it's probably going to be unhappy that the autocomplete. Now, to be clear, the centralized package management stuff.
all right, I want to give you credit. That is not going to give you IntelliSense, so that was a good job to figure that out.
Thank you. This feature has
You have two
existed in preview for details. Has existed in preview for, I think, close to 2 years at this point. The big change that actually happened with Net 7 was they actually brought in full tooling support for it. So if you use this back in the previews and then you went and decided, hey, I'm going to use my NuGet package manager window, the NuGet package manager window would just break everything. It didn't know about that file. It wasn't hip to editing it in the right places. Now, if you go through and actually make changes here, it will go through and update your package versions here. That way, there's one location. You no longer have to worry about, hey, did I right click and open the package manager from the solution for an individual project? That consolidate window that hides over here when you have multiple versions, that is no longer a thing that should hopefully come up. So is it overly useful? Perhaps, because now it gives you a single place to go through and manage things. Some people still prefer to manage them individually. Both of them work just fine.
Questions? You did such a good job, Kevin, that there's no questions.
I was just gonna ask, what do you do if you want to manage it for a specific project? Does it automatically override what you have there?
Yeah, so there are, and I'd probably have to go and double check the syntax for it. There are ways to put in individual one-off versions for specific projects. If you say, hey, don't centrally manage the version, I want to put my own version in. And there's ways to set the ranges as well of, hey, give me only within this. Because there are going to be those kind of one-off projects where it's like, no, I really do need this thing pinned on version X because of some other
this
dependency.
project, but not for the resolution. Hopefully, there's no interrupt of those data types between the projects.
Yeah. So the answer to the question, yes, you can go through and specify. I think it's as simple as just re-specifying the version here. But I might have to double check the docs on that. But yes, it is possible to override the version for a specific project.
Okay, nice.
Any other questions?
Way too easy. I saw Caleb's message in there for the tiny URL for the prize entry. So if people haven't done that, go ahead and grab it. Again, this code, if people are interested in this sample, is up on GitHub. I'll drop the link in the chat one more time if anybody needs to find it. It's fairly simple, but feel free to reference back to it if needed. And then I will drop this one back up as well. If people have follow-on questions later, there is Mark and I's contact information.
If you want to give compliments, send them to me. If you want to give, complaints, send them to Kevin. That's generally how we split stuff up.
It works well. I just auto forward.
Thank you. That was great. I appreciate you guys listening.
Thank you very much. It was very informative. So nice to see all these new features.
Yeah,
Although
every version gets a little better.
Although I think I have to bug Kevin a little bit and say, for you being the chief lackey, according to Kevin's description here, I think Mark did most of the talking and the work.
That is fair. He did have to go through and do a bunch of it. Though to his credit, he also spent a decent amount of time setting up a lot of this and going through all of the features. Sometimes writing a book has its advantages.
Right now, I feel like it's only disadvantages, but maybe. So, okay. Thanks, everyone.
Yes, thank you very much. Okay, so please stick around for prize drawings and a couple of other little tiny things. I will go ahead and take over screen share. I just stopped it here. Okay, so you should be able to see my screen again. Don't need the chat window there, so I'll go ahead and move that off. Oops. Okay, so I already posted the URL. If you didn't see it in chat, it is on screen. So tinyurl.com/SLC prize serves as both the feedback form and the prize entry form. So as long as you provide an email address there, then we will grab that email address when we send out a notification, either the prize itself or a request for more information. So one of the prizes that we have tonight, you'll see shortly, is, or I should say can be just sent off fully digitally. So get us that other one, get us that info. So we do have a Slack channel within the, I think it's the Utah SLC group. You can get to it from our website, slcnet.tech. So go ahead and jump on there, and then you can join Slack either through this link here, or you can get to it from our website as well. So we're always looking for presenters. We try to plan ahead of time. Sometimes it works out with scheduling, sometimes it doesn't. So we have some presenters for up and coming presentations. But not one scheduled for February yet. So if you happen to have one ready and are interested, go ahead and let us know by filling out that feedback, or not the feedback form, the RFP for that, or reach out to one of us directly and talk to us so we can have a conversation about it. Okay, so a big thanks to our sponsors. JetBrains, O'Reilly have been providing sponsorship for many, many years. Thank them. Health Equity, DealerTrack, Tech Systems have frequently provided facilities and other things. We do hope to get back to that this year. So we'll announce it and let you know as soon as we do. Okay, so with that, we will now jump over to prizes, and I'm going to hand that off to Gary. So Gary, just go ahead and grab that screen as soon as you are ready.
All right. Well, we've got just another minute or two. Well, probably not a minute, just a few seconds for anybody else who has not yet filled out the sponsor or filled out the feedback form. Oh, you know what? I should probably end the YouTube.